Hey, welcome everybody to our Housing Task Force Regulatory and Permitting Subcommittee meeting #1. Boy, that was a real mouthful. Thank you everybody for being here online and in person. My name is David Edgell. I am the chair of the task force. I'm also the director of the Office of State Planning Coordination. And we have with us today in the room and online other members of our subcommittee, as well as many others. And so I would like to start the meeting by just sort of welcoming everybody and going through. I guess you're going to share that. Caitlin is going to share the slides that we'll be looking at in the room. And let's go around. I'm going to just call on the task force members that are in the room and have them give a brief introduction of themselves and their roles. Then we'll go to the task force members on the online, and then we will introduce everybody else, and then we'll start with our agenda. So I'm just going to go down my list. Suzanne with Del Dot, could you introduce yourself and you're a subcommittee member? Who are you and what do you do?
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne Laws. I'm with the Delaware Department of Transportation, Division of Planning, Development Coordination section. And what I do for them, I actually do two things. One is I'm the coordinator for the Transportation Infrastructure Investment Fund grant. And then more primarily, I'm the expedited review team lead. So I actually help manage projects on an expedited review schedule through the development coordination process and get them their approvals.
Okay, thank you for serving and welcome. Next on my list is Sarah Kiefer in County Planning.
Thanks for the introduction. Take care of it. I'm Sarah Kiefer. I'm the planning director for Kent County.
Okay, welcome. On my list next is Mike Ryman. Mike.
Mike Ryman with Becker Morgan. I'm a civil engineer in my day job, and I'm also the president of the Home Builders Association.
Okay, thank you. In the room here, we have Tracy.
Tracy Searles. I'm with Woodlawn Trustees. We manage about 250 affordable housing rental units in Wilmington, and we've also recently gotten into some new construction on the east side for affordable sales.
Very good. And on the online, we've got Char. If you can introduce yourself. I don't know if you can you speak on the, there we go.
Speak forever, sorry. Char Patibanda, General Manager, Newcastle County Land Use. Thanks for including us.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I see John with Shell Brothers. John.
Hi, John Horner. I'm the general counsel with Shell Brothers and Ocean Atlantic. And I also work with the Home Builders Association with Mike.
Very good. And I saw Sean Kelly earlier. Sean, are you still there? You are.
Good morning.
Sean?
I'm Sean Kelly, Leon Wiener and Associates, Inc. We are an affordable housing developer in our 75th year in business based in Wilmington, Delaware. And we work on affordable housing development initiatives across a 10-state footprint. And we're the largest private owner operator of rent restricted affordable housing in the state of Delaware. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome and thanks for serving. And do we have Michelle Williams online? Dr. Michelle Williams.
Valeria, if you see Dr. Williams, she should be promoted to panelist. I can't see our attendee list in screen share mode.
Yeah, so if Dr. Williams can introduce herself when she gets here, or if she's here, she is the only other member of the subcommittee that we haven't already introduced. And we have others in the room. We'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves since we're here in the room, and then online we'll just kind of trust the recording captures everybody who is online. So let's Kevin, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Spence, and I'm the executive director of the Delaware League of Local Governments.
Back to the room there.
Good morning, I'm Sonia Starr, I'm the Policy Director of Housing Alliance Delaware and the staffer for the Delaware Affordable Housing Coalition.
Very good.
Good morning, I'm Dorothy Morris, I'm a certified planner in Sussex County for the Office of State Planning Coordination.
Volkovich, certified planner for Newcastle County, Office of State Planning Coordination.
Rose Acosta, I'm also with the Office of State Planning Coordination, I'm also coordinator.
Good morning, everyone. Josh Thomas. I'm with the Office of State Planning Coordination. I'm the circuit rider planner for Kent County.
And we'd be remiss not to introduce our task force, everything, Caitlin.
Yes, hi everyone, Caitlin Del Paulo, Chief Strategy Advisor at Delaware State Housing Authority. I think we may have some full task force members on virtually. I think I saw one of our co-chairs, Representative Johnson.
Yes, you did. Good morning, everyone.
welcome.
Representative Johnson. Just stopping by to say hello, to sit in for a little while, and to say thank you to you all for giving of your time and your talents for this very important crisis that we are dealing with. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. Do we know of anybody else on the?
I think I saw
Can't see all of them.
Amy Walls, I think she's one of our full task force members.
We'll just, you know, if you're online and we can't see you, thank you for being here, and the recording will capture your attendance, I'm sure. So if you go to the next slide, we have a slide with the agenda on it.
Yep, that was the previous one.
Well, there we go. Okay, there we go. So that's, we're gonna next review our task force charge and ground rules. And I believe that, Caitlin, were you gonna kind of go over the slides about the charge of the task force?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Doing that for just to kind of, you know, some of you, I think most of you have been to the full task force meetings, or at least watched them or listened to them, but I think it's always good for anybody else who is tuning in to get a grounding on sort of what this overall task force is and then what our role of our subcommittee is going to be. So.
Thank you, David. So the task force was created via the passage of House Bill 442. And the charge of the task force is to make findings and recommendations on how both the state and local governments can promote the production of rental and homeownership units that are affordable at various income levels throughout Delaware. And this charge is a direct reflection of the findings of DSHA's 2023 Housing Needs Assessment. Specifically, we learned from that assessment that statewide, we have a shortage of 19,400 rental units that would be affordable for households making between 0 and 50% of area median income. So we have this existing shortage on our rental side. We also know from the HNA, and that's short for Housing Needs Assessment, that the supply of for sale homes in Delaware is largely unaffordable unless you are a very high income earner. Specifically, we learned that in 2022, 80% of the homes that were for sale in Delaware that year were only affordable to buyers making more than 120% of area median income. So if you made less than that and you were looking to buy in 2022, you had a very small part of the market that was actually affordable to you. And so that's why we have this overarching charge of how do we get more units that are affordable, not just for our 0 to 30% AMI folks, but all along that income spectrum. Now, the legislation also gives specific charges to each of the 5 subcommittees. But I'll get to that in a second, actually. So the enabling legislation also prescribes how we are supposed to approach this work. So we are tasked with identifying what the challenges and barriers are to getting more supply out there, identifying potential solutions, and then prioritizing recommendations that are actionable. And for each recommendation that every subcommittee comes up with, we need to be very clear as to who needs to implement it. Are we talking about a state agency? Are we talking about the General Assembly? Are we talking about a local government? Or is this something that the private sector can take on? And then further, for each recommendation, we need to specify whether implementation will require legislation. And again, that could be at the state level, that could be at the local level, regulatory changes, or funding subsidies. Okay, so again, the legislation requires that we have 5 distinct subcommittees. Each of them have their own specific charge over and above the larger task force charge. So this is our regulatory and permitting subcommittee, but we also have finance and development, construction, manufactured housing, and community focus groups. And as of today, as of this meeting, all 5 of our subcommittees have now met, which is really awesome. Okay, so the regulatory and permitting subcommittee is supposed to look specifically at zoning. So that includes permitted uses, conditional uses, inclusionary zoning programs, density bonuses. We're also charged with looking at design and site requirements. So looking at setbacks, minimum lot sizes, building heights, parking requirements, et cetera, and also state and local building codes. So that's that extra lens through which we're supposed to come up with recommendations to increase the supply of housing that is affordable for households regardless of income. Okay, now we're at ground rules.
This is blank because there are no rules. But seriously, be respectful, listen to one another, share freely. And I couldn't think of any more to put up there, so we left it blank. If we get to a point where we need to move forward, kind of come up with rules for ourselves, we can certainly do that. But I think with this group of people kind of facing this challenge, I think we're all here because we realize the information Caitlin shared, the things happening in our community regarding housing do need some action, and this is an amazing group of people, and I'm really proud to be with you all focused on this issue. So with that, those are our rules.
Yep.
And part of the rules is, as you've noticed, there are 5 subcommittees in this task force as a whole, with all kind of talking about a different piece of the issue and the challenge. So number 1 rule is I don't want you to be, zoning and regulatory and permitting are our charge, but if you have other ideas or other thoughts, please bring them up as we talk if it occurs to you and if it seems relevant. And if it's not something our subcommittee can handle, we will put it in this parking lot and we'll share it with the other subcommittees and follow up as needed to make sure that information is not lost. So, while we have a specific charge in this subcommittee, I think we're all looking at this problem in a holistic way, and where there's, feedback, we will get that. On the other side of that is I fully expect that at our next meeting, one of our first agenda items is to have Caitlin or others share with us what we've heard in the other subcommittees that are relevant to our charge. So that we can kind of add to the work that we're doing with the input from others.
And I can already say, David, that all of the other subcommittees have already met, and zoning and density specifically were mentioned in 3 of them. It came up in finance and development, it came up in construction, and it came up in manufactured housing, which I don't think any of us is surprised about.
Right.
So
I'll work with Caitlin and we'll drill into that a little bit and present to you what was said in those meetings in some more detail so that we can really, dig in next meeting.
Without getting into the weeds, is it safe to say the density was increased is what they were supporting, the increase in density?
yes,
Okay.
because if you increase density, now you're spreading, construction and infrastructure costs over more units, which allows you to offer it at a more affordable price. So again, not surprising.
Sure. Thank you. I look forward to more details later when it's ready.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And I think that's what we hear about this issue when we hear about it nationwide in Delaware, from multiple sectors. So
we do have a flip chart, so maybe we can use that for our parking lot.
we can do that. And I have wonderful able assistants here who are able to help
For the markers.
to pick who's who can write, who wants to write stuff. So that's that. We're at the parking lot. And housing production needs. Now, on this section of the agenda, I'm gonna, again, ask Caitlin and her colleagues to give a general overview of information that was in the housing needs assessment. Many of us have maybe seen that in different perspectives, but because there are others that we're inviting into this subcommittee work and others online that may not have attended previous presentations, we want to give a good overview. I would like to also mention that after that, DSHA would like to share some information about fair housing, specifically as it relates to this work that we're doing, not specifically mentioned on the agenda, but I think it's very relevant and I would like, kind of a motion or consent to amend the agenda to include the fair housing information. So anybody can make a motion.
Motion to amend the agenda to
Motion
include fair
second.
housing.
You're not on the committee.
Too enthusiastic, sorry.
All those in favor?
Hang on, I gotta, for the purposes of the minutes, so Tracy made the motion, it was seconded by Suzanne. And then can we have an actual like roll call for my sanity? There are only 9 of us.
Okay, David says yes, Suzanne,
Yes.
Sarah Kiefer, Mike Ryman,
Yes.
Yes.
Sean Kelly,
Yes.
John Horner,
Yes.
Michelle Williams, if she's present. And then Tracy. Okay,
All right, we have
Well done.
8 yeses, so thank you for that.
unanimous almost.
Yeah.
So Caitlin, take it away, and I
All
don't know who wants to give the presentation, but
Thank you. All right. So as David mentioned, I wanted to talk a little bit more about our housing needs assessment. In addition to identifying our gaps in the existing rental market, we have really great projections of the housing units that we're going to need to keep up with growth by 2030. So these projections are broken down by county, by tenure. So that is whether these units should be for homeownership or for rental. And then it's also broken down by affordability as measured by a percentage of area median income, or AMI. These projections assume that we're going to be keeping our current homeownership rate, which is 71% steady. But I will note that there is a very egregious racial homeownership gap in Delaware. Our white Delawareans have a homeownership rate of 81%. Our Black Delawareans have a homeownership rate of 51%. So to the extent that we may, be able to increase the homeownership rate for Black Delawareans and close that gap, that would impact the state's overall homeownership rate. So we might actually need more homeownership units by 2030. So just wanted to give that disclaimer. And the projections that you're going to see on the next few slides are over and above that existing shortage of 19,400 rental units that are affordable for our lowest income households. I also want to note really quickly that there are a couple ways that we can address that existing shortage, right? It doesn't all come down to new construction necessarily. We could help these 19,400 renters by providing subsidies so that they can actually afford where they're currently renting and are currently cost burdened. But we could also get at it by creating new units that are priced to be affordable to them. So we can address that shortage in a number of ways, and it may be a combination of new units and subsidies. Okay, so this shows you the number of housing units needed in the state of Delaware by 2030 just to keep up with population growth. So specifically, we need about 24,349 more units. And the breakdown is most of those units, 18,000 should be for homeownership and 6,000 should be for renters. I'm gonna move this real quick. So if you look over in this column, you can see that almost half, 11,000 of those units that we need by 2030 need to be priced to be affordable for households that are at 100% AMI or above. So I think we can safely assume that the private market should be able to take care of these folks. But then the other half of this 24,000 that we need to come up with, these are units that are going to need to be affordable for people making 0 to 30% AMI, 31 to 50, et cetera, et cetera. So this chart shows the breakdown. Oh, I went too far. This chart shows the breakdown of units needed just in Newcastle County to keep up with growth. So we need 4,000 units total. 2,700 of them should be for owners. 1,200 should be for renters. And again, almost half of these units are needed at 100% AMI and above, but then approximately half are going to need to be affordable for these specific income levels. This is the chart for Kent County. So Kent County needs to add almost 7,000 more units by 2030 to keep up with growth. Again, about half of those should be for, market rate. they're 100% AMI and above, but half needs to be priced to be affordable for people at these income levels. And then most of our growth is gonna be in Sussex County. We need to add over 13,000 units in Sussex by 2030 to keep up with growth. Again, roughly half should be priced to be affordable for people at 100% AMI and over, but the other half needs to be affordable for folks making less than that. And down here, I just have a note about the shortage of rental units in each of those counties, which when you add it all up, gets us to that 19,400 figure that I've mentioned several times. And these
Can I ask
slides.
a question on
sure.
that slide?
Yeah.
So the difference between owner and renter and how that is determined. I guess my question would be, I would assume that the number of renter units, given the state of the marketplace, would actually be higher because we're seeing such a lack of affordability in the single family market at this point. So folks that weren't traditional renters are now renters, right? So how do we figure out that split in terms of the owner versus renter?
I would have to go back and ask our consultant. So the HNA was prepared on behalf of DSHA by a firm called Group Policy Research. So they actually crunched all these numbers. I do know that, you know, the assumption of maintaining the homeownership rate was baked into the numbers, but I don't know specifically how they addressed that point. I can certainly ask.
Okay.
Is there a way to get data breakdown on this to what, and I know the purchase price fluctuates obviously with interest rate, but to what kind of price range we're looking at these AMI ranges? I mean, the comment, the private sector taking care of the 100+% AMI. I think if you're right at 100% AMI, the home probably needs to be, I would think, probably between 275 and 300. But I'd like to see those numbers if we have that, because, you know, there's even concern of producing housing at that cost in the current environment. Because that's, I wouldn't even consider 300,000, you know, market rate housing at this point with where costs and everything are. So if there's a way to get that data so we can understand what we need to be at for a purchase price for those AMIs, it'd be helpful. And again, I know it fluctuates based on the interest rate environment, but.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that same question came up yesterday in our manufactured housing subcommittee meeting. I don't have those numbers in front of me. We can try to work behind the scenes to do that. I do know our housing needs assessment does have a breakdown of the maximum affordable rents by AMI. But those numbers are a couple of years out of date. They're based on 2021 American Community Survey estimates.
You can calculate it though, can't you?
Yeah,
You know what AMI ranges are.
Right,
Percent and.
I can easily update the max affordable rent table for current numbers. I am not as sure that I personally will be able to do it on the homeownership side, because you have to consider, I can tell you the maximum affordable mortgage payment, right? But I don't know how to translate that to the purchase price necessarily. You've got to factor in interest rates and.
I've kind of done it at a 6.5% rate, just looking at, you know, annual income for a family of 4 being 80,000 and 100% of AMI, and a 6.5% interest rate, and assuming 30% of the monthly income going towards rent, and it looks like it would have to be under 315,000. That's back of the napkin math, but.
So John and Caitlin, I think you just volunteered yourselves to work together. And I think, John, I think that kind of a table would be really helpful to us as we go through this process in terms of the home sale. So if we could work maybe behind the scenes for the next meeting, kind of come up with, you know, something like that we can sort of start sharing and thinking through. Because I think that with the construction subcommittee and the work of this group, we're gonna kind of get around that question of just what is achievable given the current cost, what would need to change to make those units, how accessible do they need to be, at what price point. So I think it's a very valid question, and I think we can come up with the answer.
Yes, John, I'll connect with you offline. Again, I know I can do the rental side very easily. I will absolutely accept your help on the ownership side.
Certainly.
All right. And then I just wanted to note for folks online and in the room, these slides will be posted to our website, so you don't have to take furious notes. You will be able to have this information forevermore, if you want it. All right, well, that was the end of the projected units.
Yep.
Unless there are other questions, I can go back.
Any questions about just the numbers and the number of units? The housing needs assessment is something that's available. I've seen Caitlin and others do much more detailed presentations. If any of you would like a more detailed information or presentation, we can make that available. There's a website, and some of it's in our annual report. It's on their website, so get you whatever you need from that document.
Yes, thank you for the plug.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Caitlin, would you or Karen be doing the fair housing?
Yeah, I'm gonna walk through it. If there are questions, I'm gonna lean on my colleague Karen Horton. She's on virtually. She is our senior principal planner and is our fair housing expert at DSHA. And I only have, I think, like 4 or 5 slides on this, so I will try to be brief. So the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was designed to prevent discrimination and to reverse existing housing discrimination vis-a-vis housing. It prohibits a broad range of practices that make unavailable a dwelling unit to members of a protected class. And on the side, we can see what those protected classes are: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, i.e. families with children, and disability. One thing that I want to note is that discrimination can be intentional or non-intentional, and it doesn't really matter for the purposes of enforcement, whether, for the purposes of this discussion, whether it's intentional or not. If your policy or practice has a discriminatory effect, even absent a discriminatory intention, it can violate the Fair Housing Act, which we obviously all want to avoid doing. The other thing to note about the Fair Housing Act is that it does apply to local land use policies and practices, but it doesn't preempt them. So I'll go to the next slide. So again, a policy or practice is considered to have discriminatory effects, regardless of the intent, if they result in disproportionate harm to a protected class compared to other groups of people, or if it perpetuates segregated housing patterns. And so I want to lean in a little bit on practices that are unintentionally discriminatory and that on their face may appear to be neutral. So some of those examples are having occupancy limits for unrelated persons, having multifamily housing limited to just studio or 1-bedroom units, prohibiting multifamily housing altogether, and then having minimum lot size and square footage requirements that make it difficult for members of a protected class to become residents of your jurisdiction. So these are all things that, like, you wouldn't look at that and think that it's discriminating against a particular group, but in practice, they do produce discriminatory effects. And unfortunately, there are examples of discriminatory effects happening here in Delaware. So I already mentioned that there's a 30-point gap between the white and black homeownership rate in Delaware. We also know, and these charts both come from our housing needs assessment, the majority of the state's housing stock is made up of single-family detached homes. That would be these dark blue bars down here. So if you're looking at the state of Delaware overall, about 58% of our housing stock is just single-family detached, followed by single-family attached, those are your townhomes or row homes, and then very small shares of any other type of housing. And you can see it varies a little bit by county, but generally speaking, no matter where you are, single-family detached is the most common housing type. Then you look at this, man, I keep clicking the wrong thing. If we look at this chart right here, housing type occupied by race and ethnicity, we see that our non-Hispanic white Delawareans overwhelmingly occupy those single-family detached homes, and it is much less common for them to occupy any other housing type. But if you're looking at other races and ethnicities, right, our Black Delawareans, only 38% of them are living in that single family detached. 27% live in the attached housing. You've got 20% of them that are living in 5 to 49 unit structures. So that could be a condo that you own, or it could be an apartment that you rent. And so what we can glean from this is that people of color are much less likely to be able to get into these single family detached homes. And so if our zoning and our land use regulations are making it more difficult to build the types of housing that is affordable to people of color, that raises a red flag under the Fair Housing Act. And that is something that we should be working to address.
Caitlin, quick question. Sure. Do homeowners association covenants, are they also subject to the fair housing?
Great question. Karen, I don't know if you heard the question, but the question was whether HOA covenants are, whether the Fair Housing Act applies to HOA covenants.
Yes, they are. They would be under the same category as a land use regulation. It's any kind of policy, regulation, law that causes a discriminatory effect on a protected class.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for my question, Kendra or Caitlin, you mentioned the Fair Housing Act of 1968 does not preempt local land use laws, but maybe that's, I'm not understanding correctly when she says that in fact it would, or I'm not sure.
Karen, do you want to clarify?
Oh,
So
Karen.
the question is, the Fair Housing Act doesn't preempt the local laws, but it still applies to them.
How does that work?
Right. It doesn't preempt them, but it does prohibit them from making land use decisions that violate the Fair Housing Act. Also, over time, cases of fair housing, alleged fair housing discrimination against municipalities have been upheld in court.
I think,
and in the Fair Housing Act itself, it speaks to, just as Caitlin said, including among other things, land use decisions and policies. And in the Fair Housing Act in 1968, when it talks about a dwelling unit, it even includes vacant land. So how vacant land is owned, I mean, that is covered in the Fair Housing Act.
Thank you.
The Fair
So I
Housing Act
think,
can't invalidate local land use laws, just to be clear. So if there were a law that was either discriminatory on its face or discriminatory in its practice, the Fair Housing Act could be utilized to essentially overturn that law.
Right. They would have to go through, there would have to be the case brought against them, and it would have to go up to the, the justice system, but the precedents and the act itself does show that would be the case.
and so I think when we say the Fair Housing Act doesn't preempt local governments, and that it doesn't say, hey, local government, you can't do X, Y, Z, but if your practices, whatever they are, do produce these discriminatory effects, again, regardless of intent, then you're potentially in violation.
Clarifies. Thank you.
Yeah, and so this next slide really brings home why this is an issue for all of us. So in addition to, prohibiting discrimination, the Fair Housing Act also charges the federal government and recipients of federal funding. We are obligated to affirmatively further fair housing. So not only are we supposed to not discriminate, but we are supposed to work to reverse existing segregation. As a recipient of HUD funding, DSHA has this obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. And one of the ways that we do that is providing education. So just this conversation we're having in this room right now is DSHA trying to educate the public about the Fair Housing Act, how it interacts with local land use. But this obligation leaves us in a really tricky position at times. DSHA administers HUD funding to local governments. We serve as a pass-through for some of the HUD funding programs. For example, Community Development Block Grants, or CDBG. The money comes from HUD to DSHA, and then we administer it to local governments. If a local government that has received HUD funding via DSHA is then investigated for a potential fair housing violation, we are named party to the suit. We are named as a co-defendant, even though we have absolutely no control over those local policies that are potentially discriminatory. And so that puts us in a situation of either having to withhold these badly needed federal dollars from our local governments where we want those dollars to be spent, or potentially losing that funding ourselves because we continue to administer those funds to local governments that potentially have discriminatory impacts. So that puts us in a really tricky position. The good news is there are a lot of things that local governments can do to reduce their potential legal exposure under the Fair Housing Act. And I am not going to read all of the things on this slide. This is my last slide. But for example, including at least one zoning district in your municipality that allows small lot sizes for single-family dwellings, or allowing manufactured homes that meet HUD safety standards in at least one residential district. Reducing your lot width and size requirements so that, again, we can get smaller units that are going to be more affordable to those protected classes. So that is my spiel on Fair Housing Act and how it applies to land use. Is there any other questions? Karen and I can tag team, but I felt it was really important for everybody to understand this because, you know, not only are we talking about meeting the needs of all Delawareans, we're also talking about trying to reverse segregation, which has been, you know, a problem decades in the making.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Any questions about fair housing or the information that you shared? Anybody online? Hearing none, thank you for that presentation. It is good to pair that with the need so we can kind of more understand our charge, better understand our charge. So the rest of our meeting, I was hoping that we had a conversation together from our different areas of expertise thinking about this issue. And I'm going to want to hear from each of you, and I will go last, but you're all in this task force, this subcommittee of this task force because of your work, your position, your experience, and your knowledge about housing and the development process and the charge of our task force in terms of regulatory and permitting. So just a couple of I think we said this pretty much before, but those are our charges: zoning, site design, and building codes, and those types of things. You know, if you have other ideas, don't be shy. Please bring them up, and where there's crossover, we'll share them with other subcommittees and the task force as a whole. And you may also get tapped as a resource to help us think through those in more detail. So beware. And finally, you know, when we're talking about these ideas that we may be having today, it's important to think through, you know, how the idea would be implemented and by who. Is it a state government, a local government, a private sector, combination of all three? How would it be done? So if you go to the next slide, I did want to point out that we had at the second full task force meeting, we did have a round of this brainstorming around the entire table, and these are some things that came up that are in our purview, if you will. You know, it was discussed, there's that density again. There was discussion about increasing the density in growth areas. There was discussions about redevelopment of non-residential spaces, and the idea that maybe an office building or a commercial space could become, you know, housing if it's no longer used for that purpose. And there was a discussion about by right zoning, and by that what we mean is zoning designation that would allow higher density multifamily or affordable housing by right without any special land use approvals or conditional uses or discretionary hearings on the part of the local government. That's what was talked about there. It looks like we didn't have a lot about design at that meeting, but we did, you know, there was a lot of discussion about codes, building codes that have an effect of limiting the redevelopment and reuse of older buildings, having to bring them totally up. I think that primarily came from the apartment association But it was, again, the idea if you got an older apartment complex and the cost to bring that up to current standards, current building codes requires additional investment that's gonna take to make the rent be more than it would be affordable. So there was that. And in addition to that, there was a bunch of other ideas that were talked about that I think, fit within where this particular subcommittee group would want to be talking about. There was, certainly kind of hear that before, incentivize affordable housing investment levels 1 and 2. That's our growth areas, our municipalities, our county areas with infrastructure and services. There was also, the corresponding idea of let's just build housing, everywhere, out in the farmland or wherever it might be, and you get the cheapest land and just build wherever we can build it. And, then there's, of course, discussion about how do we provide all the other things we need, but anyway, that was brought up. There was a lot of talk about, from the developers side of things, just the overall process from start to finish of how do you build, a new housing development, affordable or otherwise, and the, desire that, could that process be simpler, shorter, more streamlined, easier to get through? Very similar to that, there was a lot of talk about, Suzanne, sorry, but I mean, it was, a lot of talk about TIS and traffic studies and delays and costs associated with, how do you get through that process? And it's not really listed here, but I do remember a conversation that was, really bringing up the fact that, and again, it's the nature of the way we are in Delaware, that local governments have the approval authority for land use and zoning and site plans and subdivision plans, but that DelDOT and other state agency, you have to always go through DelDOT if you want access to a state road. And in Delaware, 90% of the roads are DelDOT roads. So, there's it's inescapable that you're going to be working with DelDOT through this process. How those processes mesh? How can they mesh, better or more, more streamlined way? And of course, we were talking other permits with dead rec and stormwater and other things. Comprehensive planning was talked about. Our charge is really not so much planning per se, but those comprehensive plans set forth land use strategy in each local jurisdiction. Those land use strategies can include things like where residential uses go, and at what densities and of what types and how they all fit together. So I think that is definitely in our purview. There was a comment about, fair share. And if you're familiar with housing in other places, the Mount Laurel in New Jersey, I mean, there's a whole body of law and a whole thought that each local jurisdiction needs to have a share of the housing needs for the region. Delaware is a little different than New Jersey and some other states, and we don't have towns, townships, boroughs and things, but the concept is everybody should be, every local jurisdiction should be sort of shouldering the share of that housing. And I will give a plug to state housing as a housing reform map, I believe. Areas of opportunity.
Yeah.
That kind of dives into that with some data and some GIS mapping showing, what areas have a oversupply or a saturated.
Yes.
Things. We can share that map and that work with all of you. I think it would be helpful to see. And then I think that last bullet point just kind of sums it all up in that in order to solve this problem from a regulatory standpoint, it really is going to require that coordination between state and local government. Again, that's just the nature of how we operate in Delaware with the state, Schulenberg for infrastructure and services that maybe in other states are a county or a local responsibility. So again, we need to lean into that cooperation and coordination that we have always had and need to do more of. So those are the things that were talked about. Before we move into all of your thoughts on these things, are there any questions about, for those of you who could not attend that first or second task force meeting, and any questions about any of these things that got brought up? I know some of you were there.
The meetings were recorded, so you can go on DSHA's website and watch them if you're so inclined.
Okay. So now that I've given you my summary of kind of what I thought all those things meant, and I don't know, if you like my idea?
Yep.
So Caitlin is gonna type, gotta change the layout of that to make it, go to home. There you go, you got it. She'll type these things. So what I was hoping that what I want us to do, I'm gonna ask each of you to, vis-a-vis what you've heard today and sort of learned so far, from your area of expertise and your perspective, if you could kind of talk through 1, 2, or 3 ideas that you would have that you think this subcommittee should explore further. And let me tell you the cadence of I'll give you a little preview of the cadence of the 3 meetings we have scheduled to help a little bit with that. You know, today I hope that we have a list of kind of what our thoughts are from hearing what we've heard from other groups and from your perspectives, get a good list together. At the next meeting, among the presentations that we want to have is, the Delaware chapter of the APA has been working on a housing supply accelerator project. Josh Thomas, who is here, has been involved in that, as have many others. They held a series of meetings with a broad segment of stakeholders throughout the summer and are working on their sort of findings from that. And I want to hear from them, if at all possible, by the next meeting to kind of share that output with this group to see which things match up. Because they sort of had a series of conversations very much like this, see if we have some concurrence or some things that are sort of the low-hanging fruit or the best ideas that seem to rise at the top at the next meeting. And then, by the 3rd meeting, which is in December, we need to come up with a series of recommendations that we're going to put forth to the full task force. And we'll need to work to flesh those, so maybe if we come up today and we have 10 ideas, and next time we hear from the APA group and maybe some others, and we find out there's some concurrence and we come up with a group at the top 5 ideas, by the 3rd meeting, those are our 5 best ideas for how do we move this work forward. We're going to need to really flesh out as a group, who does it, how does it get done, how will it be implemented, by which level of government or the private sector, what will it require, legislation, funding, subsidy, private market, regulatory reform, whatever it may be. So that's what I see as our cadence in the next few months. And I know it's a short time frame, but I also know that none of us in the room or on the call have just come to this, not having thought about this for quite a while as a huge challenge. So any questions about that cadence and those where we might go? Okay. So with that, I'm going to call first on Suzanne because she is first on my list here on my screen to talk a little bit. So I want to hear your ideas, but also talk a little bit about expedited permitting in DelDOT, and particularly I want to prelude this with the fact that as we've talked about it on our team and with DSHA and with others in the past year and a half, it just occurs to us that we've done an awful lot in Delaware in the past 7-8 years on economic development and expediting projects that are gonna spur commercial and job creating economic development growth. And I'm just thinking that there's some lessons there and some programs there that might be helpful if we want to expedite or help affordable housing projects. So Suzanne, you have thoughts about that and kind of basically what you do?
Well, a couple of things, actually. With the expedited review process that's currently in place, the mighty team of 2 that I lead, is that our secretary was way forward thinking. And so it was a year or more ago, Caitlin, that I contacted you, and we actually added affordable housing to our expedited review process. So not only are we expediting economic development projects that are creating a significant number of jobs in the state, recognizing that economic development kind of drives the train a little bit, but we added affordable housing and public services, like emergency response facilities, to our expedited process. So we already have that ability, and we actually have processed a couple of projects through there, the George Reed Village in New York. There's one in Sussex County as well. So we're at the ready to push these through. And also, I want to say, traffic impact studies, yes, they take a long time. That's not my side of the house right now in development coordination. That is the traffic impact study group. However, I will say that because, an affordable housing project does qualify for an expedited plan review, we're kind of making up for time that was lost, if you will, during the traffic impact study portion of the project. So it's not as though, you're gonna spend 6 months to a year studying and another 6 months, well, hopefully less than 6 months, but a year more getting your plans approved. Our goal is to get you, once you have your traffic impact study review letter, you're getting in the door and out the door, less than 6 months with approved plans. So that's our way that helps the process along. I feel like with that, I'm in a position to better react to the folks who have ideas about zoning and density changes, because that does affect the number of trips at the site, and that in turn affects the design of the transportation improvements and the requirements for the improvements. And because every trip does count, we have to be mindful of that. So I'd like to just be here as a resource to react to some ideas that are coming from the land use agent. That's who primarily we support.
Can I ask a question? So Suzanne, I remember that conversation, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's incumbent upon the local jurisdiction to flag to Del Dot that this is an affordable housing project, right?
Yes.
And they get to set their own criteria as what is considered an affordable housing project.
Yeah, we went through a little bit of a listening tour of the land use agencies to find out who had an affordable housing, who had criteria. And so, the land use agency sort of tells us, yes, it's an affordable housing project. And so, we can go ahead and expedite that. But the definition is not, it's not like uniform.
It can differ between local jurisdictions. And I guess my question for you is this something that you have promoted with all local jurisdictions, so they're aware of this is a resource or a process that they can take advantage of?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, okay.
I sure hope so. I mean, this is published on our website. I believe we did talk to all the 3 counties. I believe we talked to Newark. I know that.
Yeah.
So, we did make some folks aware of it, but we can push it out again.
Okay, so maybe what we have written here, I would say maybe ideas promote that more, make people more aware of this, expedited review process that, and I think another thing I heard was, what is the, local governments are making the call about what is, is there a way to make that definition more uniform or more understandable? I'm not sure all local jurisdictions would understand or know what a project is necessarily without.
You mean what an affordable housing project is? Well, I guess that would require coordination with DSHA and amongst themselves. Because that's, again, all that is here to support the land use agency, right? We're reacting to them and what the land use is for the project.
If we do want to coordinate it, I would think we would want to be looking at what is the local need, right? Like in that jurisdiction, right? How much of the population is at 0 to 30% AMI, and what is the existing shortage there? So I guess what I'm saying is we don't necessarily need to have a one size fits all of affordable housing projects, but does this project help this particular town serve their actual residents that, are maybe cost burdened currently?
I mean, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, so I think we'll get that on the board there. So we'll, thank you, Suzanne.
Can I, this is Sean Kelly. Jump in quickly.
Sean, go ahead and chime in.
I just would like to offer a traditional definition of affordable housing from a practitioner standpoint and understand if that kind of aligns with the dialogue that we're having right now. Because I think defining this term is important. I think that what we're noticing is, affordable and workforce housing and how that is defined can be very different and very, depending on where you are. So, from our perspective, capital A affordable housing serves persons at 60% of median income and below. And is, guaranteed affordable housing through some sort of underlying regulatory agreement, which mandates affordability for those units for a designated period of time. Then middle income housing is traditionally being defined above 60% of AMI up to 120% of median income. And I just think it's helpful, or I welcome anyone's feedback in this conversation to offer, some concrete definitions of the folks that we are attempting to serve when we work within the more traditional affordable housing programs, utilizing DSHA resources, tax credit resources, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, the United States Department of Agriculture, rural development programs. Those are all going to serve folks at 60% of median income and below. And we kind of define this missing middle gap where there's no traditional production mechanism for affordable housing being between that 60 or even in many instances 80% of AMI and 120% of AMI. And I think that it's worth having that definition as part of our notes when discussing how we are looking at avenues for things like expedited review, so that there's a lot of clarity. We don't need folks to be, going to a number of other regulatory authorities to get buy-in on whether or not this fits. If you are serving these folks, then you fit this definition. I hope that's helpful. That's what we're seeing.
Very helpful.
Definition.
As clearly as I've ever heard it described. Thanks. Because there's a lot of ways to talk about this. So, yeah, we've got that in the notes, and specific to this sort of the DelDOT expedited review. Any other subcommittee members have a thought, comment on that idea before we move on?
I just have a question. I mean, on the economic development, the Ready in 6 initiative, and it seems like there are similarities between DelDOT's expedited plan review and the Ready in 6 initiative. And I'm just curious if, we're seeing any efficiencies, if anyone knows, I do not, on, kind of Ready in 6 projects that are more for, driving job creation that we could perhaps implement in a housing context.
Great question. Mike Ryman in the room, you have any thoughts about, has this Ready in 6 been helpful to some projects?
So, I mean, Ready in 6 originally was, the impetus behind that was more on the economic development side of things, of course. So some of the initiatives that were completed last legislative session weren't targeted at housing. For example, the plus exemption did not target housing, and there's some question about whether or not that makes sense to continue in that format. The expedited review piece that Sean is talking about has been a tremendous help so far. So for those that don't understand or haven't heard of that, there's a couple different ways to do expedited review. DelDOT initiated this ERT process 5 years ago, 6, I don't know, it's been a number of years at this point, maybe longer.
COVID-ish.
Yeah, but that process was originally also targeted at your large economic development, high profile kind of projects. You couldn't use it for a subdivision, for example. And now with the affordable housing piece, that's the new addition to that. And they use their own staff to do those reviews in a agreed upon schedule timeline. It's very similar to the Jobs Now process in Newcastle County. They really kind of pair well together. The expedited review process that was done as part of the Ready and Six initiative looked at using third-party consultants to supplement the staffing at Del Dot and particularly Denrec. It only got done kind of in part. So it ended up being a pilot program that was done in all three, only in two counties, Kent and Sussex County. And since then, Del Dot did modify its regulations to provide that option. That option is actually available really to anybody. So it is there. And what that does is if you have a project and you want to expedite that review, you can agree to this third-party review. They're funded by the developer, and the turnarounds are in like 14 days or 18 calendar days, what have you, roughly. We've used it. It's going well. On the pilots that were done, we saw timelines shrink to like a couple months, 2 to 3 months total time frame. On the sediment stormwater side of things, Kent Conservation District changed their regulations, and Sussex Conservation also changed theirs to utilize something similar. They're similar but different. Sussex allows both an internal expedited review at a higher fee or a third-party review. Obviously, you're paying whatever those fees are. Kent Conservation really only has an internal review, but they charge a higher fee for those turnarounds.
Are those open to housing projects? Anything.
Any project, there's no distinction. So any project can take advantage of those. We've used them on most recently the Milford Corporate Center project went really well. The turnaround time's just been tremendous. So I would.
So lessons from that world of expediting things, could work in the housing realm.
Yes. 100%. I mean, we did a study, the home builders did a study of an example home in, we just picked Sussex County just because we had the data. We presented this at the Delaware Real Estate Summit where we looked at all of the various costs going into a typical home using an average price of about $470,000, which I believe is roughly Delaware's average. And we saw in this particular example that interest alone, which is essentially time, right? From the time that the project started all the way to the time that everybody's phone's going off. Sorry, there's some kind of
Public safety alert.
public safety thing. So,
Old Street, remember that is.
so what we saw is in that analysis, we saw interest cost about $30,000 on the price of this home. All the way from, raw land to building the home and somebody walking in, to their new home. So time is a huge cost added on to a home, and there are ways that we can shorten that time frame, and it really doesn't cost the taxpayer anything, right? So, but we can save lots of costs in our homes.
So, Caitlin, I would, where we put that down, like Ready and Six, streamlining, save cost on interest. That's just a note to ourselves. And hold your question if you could, Sonia. And I just to put a cap on this discussion, we do have to move on. I do also, the state has some other initiatives that were kind of Ready and Six style things. You mentioned House Bill 104, the plus exemption for economic development projects, which we've got. There's Transportation Infrastructure Investment Fund, which Suzanne, you're familiar with that. You operate that program. That's to, buy down some of the cost of the transportation infrastructure for economic development projects. We have a site readiness fund that's intended to allow for offsetting some costs for getting a site shovel ready. Again, and some of those programs not yet available to housing or affordable housing per se, but I just want to put on the board that those are things that we could be talking about as things that state government could do by opening those opportunities up for local governments, developers, and affordable housing providers to get to that point.
If I could just add one more on the Ready and Six side related to time. There was also the House bill for the TID, the sort of statewide TID.
There was that.
And that is a huge benefit, meaning TIDs in general. Because you heard Suzanne talk about the time side with affordable housing. So if there was a TID approach, that's time through the traffic study process that can shrink.
So TID stands for Transportation Improvement District. And those are areas, there are 12 or 14 of those in the state now that are either in place or being developed. And those are areas where DelDOT works with local governments to do a sort of a pre-TIS for the whole network. And then developers bypass the TIS process by just paying a per trip fee towards the overall improvements. They are huge, huge areas that can save a whole lot of time and also frankly, lead to a much better sort of integrated transportation system rather than trying to fix one little piece of one little road at each development. So I want to put that on the list.
Yeah, they also ultimately save money for the developer in the sense that TIDs are coming in at building permit. And on other projects that are not in TIDs, or we have to do all the offsite improvements up front, you're seeing your initial first phase costs being so high, and then you're carrying those costs throughout the course of the project with interest carry at 7.5%, 8%. So you're really seeing the incremental cost. I mean, the banks are essentially taking money from the transportation fund in that instance. So TIDs are great. Developers love them. They increase, time to market, they lower costs, and they overall end up in better overall traffic improvements in those areas. Because you go into non-TID areas and you see development, it'll be development, wide road, multimodal path, undeveloped area, narrow road, development, wide, just drive down Robinsonville Road. I mean, it's multimodal paths to nowhere.
So knowing we need to move on, I think let's just, cap this by saying let's economic development approaches and all the things we've talked about, maybe something we should explore a little further.
David, may I just respond?
Sonia didn't have a question, so go ahead.
May I,
Yes.
to the TID, and I think it's a fabulous concept to have a statewide TID. Here's the stitch though. The reality is the improvements that are covered under the TID may not come to fruition for many, 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 many years. So while there's a benefit now to getting homes, to the market and projects out there, and it benefits developers, the real benefit to the traveling public won't be seen for quite a long time into the future, because those projects still have to go into the capital transportation plan and things. So the expectation, I just want to set the expectation that TIDs, while they solve a short-term problem, the long-term is still out there. So that's something that we dealt with.
Is that something we can look at though? So what needs to change so that doesn't happen, right? So what is it is it a regulatory issue? Is it a funding issue? Is it
about the CTP?
Right.
So
Well,
Suzanne brings up, again, a very good, very real point, and that was really a challenge with the sort of statewide approach versus the, doing them by TID district based on local government's comprehensive plans and smaller areas. So not to get us, I think, let's explore that, in the coming months, and we can come back next time and maybe give a presentation about, Ready in 6 TID, things that can save time and money if we make them more acceptable or more affordable housing more available in those areas for those programs. That sound good?
Yeah, let me get some data and bring it back.
Okay. So if you could hold your comment to a public comment, if you would. Moving on, in the interest of time, we've heard from Suzanne. Sarah, do you have anything you want to throw up on the board while we're moving through? I know you're doing a lot of great work in King County with zoning and regulations and such.
Just a couple of things. I know we're low on time. Although if I could follow up on the previous conversation, the impression I have, and I'm just looking for clarification, are the localized TIDs being incorporated into the CTP?
They do.
Okay.
They get, projects get ranked.
Okay.
And what I want to come back with next time is where the TID, like how the TID is part of the ranking.
Okay, I was hoping for that. Thank you.
Understand. Yeah.
Perfect. From the local perspective, I mean, I think everybody's in agreement that zoning regulations, building regulations throw up roadblocks in development. Kent County at least is making steps to simply pulling regulations back and not being in the way of the market just working. And that's market rate, it's affordable, it should get out of the way. It's entirely possible in the next couple of months, they'll be taking on an ordinance, cutting lot sizes, increasing density, changing housing types, things like that. we are in a position where I've got elected officials who are interested in doing that. That's not true of every local government. So my question is, how do you build in incentives without the heavy hand of state government?
Incentives without heavy hand of state government, that's. Put that on the board if you would.
I would say that the lead mirrors the question that she's asking.
Okay.
So carrot, not stick.
Carrot, not
Yes.
stick.
Yeah,
Carrot, not stick.
right. Because it's the locals who are, when a project is being considered, it's the locals getting beaten up. And we need to change the incentive structure.
Char has her hand up.
Okay, Char.
Hey there.
Yeah, good.
I just had a suggestion because I know we're running out of time and I have a
Yeah.
12 o'clock
You're up there.
meeting as well, so I apologize. But so like Kent and Sussex, I think Newcastle County is taking like much bigger, bolder steps towards meeting a lot of the criteria that were talked about in the earlier slides. One is the redevelopment ordinance that has been signed into law. We actually have 2 projects already that are going to produce almost 100 units of mixed use type housing on corridors. They were in before.
Your sound is cutting out.
The ordinance passed, where kind of hurdle to get approval. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? I'm just driving by the airport.
Yes.
I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, sorry. So our redevelopment ordinance is actually already working to create mixed use housing on our corridors, and we're really excited about what's to come. My idea was that best practices slide you have, and 100% I am not in favor of state governments taking control over land use policies. I think that really is left best to local control jurisdictions, because we are on the ground, we know what's going on, and we have the public outreach infrastructure set up to deal with these type of local policies. So I'm not in favor of the state taking away control and guidelines. Maybe that should just be a law that every jurisdiction has to follow, that you have to allow for smaller lot sizes, which we're working on an ordinance called the Pocket Homes Ordinance that will comply with that. The manufactured home zoning has to be allowed, all of that. I mean, that's just a few kind of basic requirements. It's not super heavy-handed, but it also just levels the playing field for all jurisdictions to not just pass it off to the bigger, like, for example, unincorporated Newcastle County. So that may be something that the state can actually do that doesn't take away local control, but just sets a baseline for what types of housing can be created in every jurisdiction.
Thank you, Char. I'm going to go next to Sean for your turn, and then we'll go back to the room.
Am I off mute? Yeah. So I can certainly understand the perspectives of my colleagues here who are representing local governments. I think that I would respectfully disagree with the concept of carrot, not stick. I think the state needs to stick them. And
Why we're here to kind of get all perspectives, so
we are here as a group of folks, in my understanding of the assignment, making recommendations to the state level of how we can do a better job overall in moving forward housing affordability. So, when I see things that are going on around this country that are state level zoning reforms, elimination of parking minimums, legalizing triplexes and quads, accessory dwelling units, etc. Everyone in here, most of everyone in here is more familiar with these things as planning experts than I am as a practitioner developing housing. But these are the trends that you are seeing across our country in a number of jurisdictions to address this incredibly problematic issue. I mean, you're talking about, to stay level, 40,000 units in the state of Delaware between now and 2030. stick them. So, the state should bully pulpit to withhold resources from jurisdictions that don't get their act together on this. It's that dire. And, I have a number of other ideas. I'm really, mostly on the financing side of things in my role, but I'm really happy to be a part of this committee. I think we should implement inclusionary zoning in the Downtown Development District program. That's been a successful program, stood up under Governor Markell and furthered now under Governor Carney. And you're seeing huge amounts of multifamily housing investment in certain corridors, and we're not getting any affordable units out of it. And they're taking state money. And they're taking state money away from, honestly, because it's a limited resource, from the lowest of low-income residents that need it, in serving our HDF program, the Housing Development Fund, which I would also offer has remained basically flat in its funding for the better part of 20 years. So how about just increasing the Housing Development Fund and indexing it to inflation? That would be a start. I'd also like to see upzoning potentially at the state level. I'm not sure exactly how this would work, but we know where the existing affordable housing is in this state that's financed through the Delaware State Housing Authority. Many of these properties were designed and developed during an era in which land use kind of promoted more sprawling communities, garden apartments and things like that. Increasing density in our existing affordable housing communities where we know there are opportunities to do that and further those resources. I'd also like to see a map, a GIS map of state-owned land. I think the state land holdings are a powerful tool for us facilitating things like P3 partnership. I'm running out of time here, but
you could email Caitlin and I, any task force member, subcommittee member, again, you can follow up with an email and we'll put it on the list for next time as we are running out of time. I want to save at least a few minutes. We need to have a public comment session at the end. Anybody else? Mike?
I guess the only thing I just want to make sure, we dance around the edges, but the density. Density is just
put it on there.
Entirely too low in Delaware across the board. Especially in multi.
Well, and yeah, if I could, I think what we have to understand is that the issues of the housing in this, it's not going to be fixed by anything but private development. The state and the government cannot build enough units to meet our demand. And developers really want one thing. They want certainty and they want speed to market. And
speed to market.
And the density, and right now the approval environment in a lot of areas in order to get the density you need to build more affordable housing is abysmal. It's pretty much impossible in a lot of areas to try to build that without some form of discretionary level of approval that is being undertaken by a political body that is being heavily influenced by anti-development groups. And there's lots of studies about the impacts on NIMBYism and the ability to build these things. So we need to understand that we need to have zoning that is by right, that it does not involve a discretionary process that allows developers to get through and allows them to get through in a fast manner. And we need to understand this expedited review. It absolutely should happen for affordable housing, but housing at all levels is what is going to help solve this crisis that we have. Study after study says this is just a supply and demand problem, and housing at all levels leads to what's called a move. It creates a move up chain. And so we need to, it's certainly more dire at the affordable levels, but we need to figure out speeding every single approval up as we've talked about. But on the density front too, it also needs to be buildable density. And that's where those lot sizes and bulk restrictions and setbacks and height limitations all come into play. It's not enough just to say you can do 24 units to the acre if the minimum lot sizes are 10,000 square foot or 7,500 square feet or even 5,000 square feet, right? You're not going to be able to get that density in. And, Sussex County, for example, you can't build a taller than a 4-story building. So you can't really get any density beyond their maximum, which is 12 units to the acre. I'll say that I agree the stick is what is needed for this, because if you look at what has been done nationwide, you've seen in California, they've done things like the builder remedy. I mean, Jersey, and now that was done judicially, has the Mount Laurel doctrine, but it requires, generally what we've seen is they require the comprehensive plan for each of the municipalities to provide sufficient zoning to address the housing needs of the community that they serve. And that means land that is appropriately zoned for the density and in the locations where this is needed. And so I think we need to have the comprehensive plan mandate meaningfully that those types of zonings exist. And I'll even go so far as to say, look at what exists for the builder's remedy in California, which is where if a municipality does not have an approved plan to address this, then developers are allowed to go in and essentially get anything approved as long as it has an affordable housing component to it. So I think we should be looking at these. There's been reforms at the state level in red and blue states, Montana, California. You could not be more politically diverse. And they have said that if you leave this to the local level, where they are really subject to the whims and caprices of their constituency at a super close local level, it's not going to get done. NIMBYs and anti-development folks will win the day. And they already have housing. They're not the group we're trying to serve.
Thanks, John. In the interest of time, and Char, I see your hand, so hold your hand. I'm going to ask Tracy to go. If she has any ideas, thoughts, comments to put on the board for.
Sure, and I'm gonna go very quick, because I
Please.
think there's been a lot of good comments, like carrot versus stick. A lot of good points either way. It seems there needs to be a balance, because I feel like if the state doesn't put forward some type of guideline, time frame. In addition to Woodlawn, I was 25 years in Newcastle County, so that's where I'm
Get that
coming from
perspective
a
as
little
well.
bit there, right?
Yeah.
So striking that balance where there are like goals, smaller lots, timeframes, but then giving the local government some type of purview over that. One just thought I had sitting here is I'm familiar with Newcastle County, but not so much with the others. So as we talk sometimes, is it worthwhile in another one of these, or at least providing information even to read about what other jurisdictions are doing to kind of help us what's working, what's not, even within our own state?
Yeah, we can,
And
we've got
just-
some materials like that.
Well, I know it's sometimes helpful to say this has worked well, this has had, and where are we as far as the three counties, as far as the differences in their densities, their lot size? You know that.
There's something that we can, I've got some materials that we prepared last summer I can send out to the committee of just kind of a scan of what the local governments are doing, what their comprehensive plans say. It may not have all that information, but it'll be a start.
Additionally, so I'm working with data fellows from Tech Impact. They're coming up with an interactive zoning map that shows for each of our counties, and we're trying to include cities at this point too, where you can build different housing types by right versus conditional use process. So I think that's really illustrative of where we have room for improvement. That's in process.
In process, yeah. And again, is it?
That I have to throw this in, it's a little different than what we've talked about, and it might kind of go in the box for another committee, but we've talked a lot about new development from like a rental provider. Some of the things we've been looking at are like property and school tax abatements or permit process, not just for new development, in order to keep your units up to speed, the rehabs, we're doing a lot of that. Is there anything you can look at there as far as permit fees or less? I know that's kind of a little bit different, but
But that's in the bucket of fees and building codes, which is also in our purview in this subcommittee. So definitely want to put that on the board to talk about. And that was mentioned at the full task force as well. So thank you. Now, Char had a comment. She had to go really soon. Char, are you still there? Do you still have a comment?
I think her hand was just always up.
It was
I
up,
just
down.
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't lower it. I have lots more
Okay.
comments, but I'll wait. But yes, thank you.
Thank you for being here, Char.
Okay. Any concluding thoughts or comments? Understanding we'll come back and talk about these in more detail the next time.
Can I share one?
Caitlin, you
Very
can share
quickly.
one.
So we've talked a lot about carrot versus stick, state versus local control. I am not going to opine on the matter as a staffer of DSHA. The only thing I will say is I implore everybody to look at Utah's Senate Bill 34. I believe it was passed in 2019. This was briefly covered at the second task force meeting. Utah came in and passed a bill and said,
counties and local governments of a certain size have got to adopt strategies to produce moderate income housing. But then they provided a list of 23 different options of how they could do that. I think that is a good balance of coming up with state guidelines, but also giving local governments choice in how they do that. So please, 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 like, if you want more information about it, I'm happy to send it to you.
We can share it, can't we?
We can share it, but I want everybody to take a serious look at that.
Okay.
Back to you.
So, given that, thank you for that comment, Caitlin. It was covered at the previous task force meeting. We do have a public comment period. I apologize for my going a little bit over, but this is a very, very good conversation. I wish we had another hour or half an hour or whatever. So, if we could, I know, Sonia. Okay, anybody who has a public comment, if you could sort of raise your hand, if that's possible. And Caitlin will call on you and do the timer thing.
Yep, okay, so let me see if I can screen share this.
Okay, are
So
there
let's,
any public comments from people who are not on the task force?
all right, so we'll start with folks who are in the room. So Sonia, you don't have anything? Okay. I don't think we have anybody else physically in the room. All right, if you are online and you would like to provide public comment, please use the raise hand function and I will ask Valeria to unmute anybody whose hand is currently raised. Since I can no longer see the list of people in screen share mode.
There's no one with their hand raised, Caitlin.
Oh, all right.
Well, that's,
Well, we will still accept any written public comments within the next 48 hours. So if you are tuned in and you want to provide public comment, you can send it to housing.taskforce@delaware.gov.
thank you very much, Caitlin and Valeria. And only other item on our agenda is adjournment, but before that, thank you all for your ideas and conversation. I think we've got enough notes that we can structure the next agenda around a more deliberate conversation of these different ideas and hopefully get us to that third meeting where we come up with some recommendations for that task force. So do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Tracy and then Mike? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none, thank you for everybody online, thank you for
Thank you.
participation, and we'll talk to you soon.